She was setting the quarterly reports on the edge of Savio Maro's conference table when the coin slipped free of his collar. It happened in a fraction of a second. He leaned forward to initial something, his dress shirt pulled open at the throat, and the chain swung out. The coin at its end was silver, worn smooth along the edges, no bigger than a quarter. The number on its face, 14, was stamped clean and deep. Maren Boyle's hand stopped moving. She had placed thousands of documents on conference tables. She had worked 3 years in the Meridian Club's accounting office without once being noticed by anyone who mattered. She was good at that. She was tall, soft-figured, the kind of woman who learned early that taking up less space was easier than explaining herself. She wore sensible shoes and kept her dark hair clipped back, and she understood that her job was to deliver numbers, not opinions. But her hand had stopped. That coin. The words came out before she caught them. Mr. Maro, my brother carried one exactly like it. No one breathed. There were 4 men in that room besides Savio Maro. 2 were attorneys with matching briefcases. One was his personal assistant, a thin man named Orin, who never made eye contact with anyone. The 4th was Savio's head of security, a former military contractor named Galt, who had, apparently, been waiting for exactly this kind of moment. Galt moved between Maren and Savio in less than a second. His hand closed around her wrist, not rough, but final. Step back. Let her go. Maren hadn't seen Savio stand. He had simply gone from seated to standing, and his voice had the quality of a door closing in a quiet house. Absolute, unhurried. Galt released her wrist immediately. Savio looked at the other 4 men in the room. Leave. Nobody argued. Chairs scraped. The door opened and closed, and then Maren was alone in the Meridian Club's most private conference room, with a man whose full name appeared in federal surveillance records, 3 state grand jury transcripts, and the quiet, terrified conversations of everyone who worked above her. He didn't ask her to sit. He asked, "Your brother was a police officer." It wasn't a question. "Yes," she said. "Precinct 14, 15 years. Savio looked at the coin resting against his chest. He didn't touch it. How long ago? 17 years. The room was the kind of quiet that had weight. Maren had heard many reactions to that sentence over the years. Sorry for your loss. He was a hero. Must have been so hard. She had answered each one with the correct expression and moved on. Savio Maro did none of those things. He sat back down. He looked at the coin. What was his name? Daniel, Danny, to everyone who knew him. What was he like? The question was wrong somehow. Not cruel, wrong the way a key feels wrong in a lock that almost fits. Too specific, too careful. Maren answered anyway, because the coin was still catching the light. Stubborn, she said. He thought being my older brother was a full-time job. If I had a bad day, he knew before I called. If someone made me cry, he had a very good reason to walk me to school the next morning. She paused. He also couldn't parallel park to save his life, which he would not want me to mention. Something crossed Savio's face. It lasted less than a second. Did he carry that coin on him? Every shift. Was there more than one? Maren went very still. She had not said anything about multiples. She had said one coin, one brother. The question landed with the precise weight of something that should not have been known. There were 2, she said carefully, unit coins. They gave them out when you made detective. Danny got his and framed one for our mother. He kept the other one on him. Savio's jaw moved, barely. Did he ever tell you what was stamped on the back? Maren's hand moved before she stopped it, reaching instinctively for a coin she had not seen in 17 years. How do you know there's something on the back? Savio said nothing. Maren took one step closer to the table. Mr. Maro, I need you to tell me how you know that. He looked at her the way people rarely did. Not past her, not through her, directly at her. "Someone," he said quietly, "who has been trying to find Daniel Boyle's family for 17 years. 17 years earlier, Savio Marrow had not been a man who emptied rooms. He had been a 17-year-old boy crouched behind a display rack of canned soup, listening to a man with a gun shout at a convenience store cashier who had already opened the register twice. The robbery had been going wrong for 8 minutes by the time Officer Daniel Boyle came through the side door. Savio had been in the wrong place because of a carton of milk. His mother had sent him 2 blocks from their apartment at 10 at night, and now there were 4 other people frozen in various parts of the store, and a gunman who had worked himself into a panic, which was always worse than a calm one. Boyle moved low and fast along the far refrigerator wall, assessed the room in 4 seconds, made eye contact with Savio, and held one finger against his lips. Then he handed Savio his radio. "Get out through the back," he murmured, so quietly it registered more as shape than sound. "Give that to whoever's outside. Tell them 2 armed, 1 panicked, 4 civilians still inside." Savio stared at him. "Go. What about you?" Boyle's mouth curved just slightly. "I've got work to do. Move." Savio moved. He made it to the back corridor before he stopped. He stood there for 30 seconds listening to Daniel Boyle's voice, calm, clear, measured, talking the gunman down from the edge of something irreversible. He heard the particular silence that followed a weapon being surrendered. He heard the rush of voices outside as more units arrived. He went back in. Boyle was cuffing the gunman. He looked up when Savio reappeared in the doorway, and for a moment his expression was purely exasperated. "I told you to leave." "You didn't say stay out." The exasperation faded into something that looked like recognition. Boyle stood. He reached into his breast pocket, found the silver coin, and turned it over once before pressing it into Savio's palm. "I don't want." "You went back in." Boyle closed Savio's fingers around it. "Keep it." "Why?" But 3 more officers came through the front doors then, and the moment ended the way moments do, into noise and procedure and the long business of documenting what had happened. Savio was moved outside. He gave a statement to a detective who asked the same 4 questions twice. By the time the scene was secured, the officer who had given him the coin had disappeared into the organized chaos of a resolved incident. Savio turned it over in his hand. On the back, barely legible in the scratched silver, were 4 words, for the ones after. He kept it. He had no name. He had a face and a precinct number, and 4 words stamped into aging metal, and for years that was all he had. By the time Savio Marrow became the kind of man who could find almost anyone, Daniel Boyle had been dead for 11 years. The trail had gone cold in pieces. First the name, which took 3 years to surface through a retired dispatcher who remembered a detective at Precinct 14 who'd talked a gunman down on a Tuesday night. Then the records, partially archived, partially missing. Then the family. His investigators found a mother who had passed 4 years prior. They found a sister, one sister, younger, but her address had changed twice, and her name hadn't appeared in any of the places Savio's people knew to look. He never stopped looking. He never took the coin off. Maren sat down. She had not intended to. Her knees simply made the decision for her. Savio moved a glass of water across the table and waited. "You were there," she said. "The Cartwright Street store." "Yes." She looked at the man across from her. The expensive suit, the absolute stillness, the kind of calm that came not from ease, but from having made peace with exactly what you were. She tried to imagine him at 17. She couldn't quite do it. "He gave you the coin before he went back in?" "He told me to leave. I didn't." A pause. "He gave it to me after." Maren pressed her palms flat against the table. Her mother had spent years wondering. Not bitterly. Her mother had not been a bitter woman, but with a specific, quiet wondering that appeared in certain silences. Someone came home that night because Danny went in. I'd like to know they're all right. She never found out. She died not knowing. My mother would have wanted to meet you, Marin said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. She passed 6 years ago. Savio went very still. She always said that knowing someone made it out because of him would make losing him hurt differently. Not less, just differently. The silence had a different texture now. I should have found you sooner, he said. You found me at all. Marin looked at the coin still resting on the table between them. 17 years of it against his chest, under every expensive shirt, through every hard room and harder decision. What does it say on the back? Savio lifted the chain over his head. He set the coin between them. For the ones after. Marin read it twice. She had never known. The coin her mother kept framed in the hallway was face-upped, the precinct number showing. She had never thought to look at the back. The ones after, she said. I've spent 17 years trying to figure out whether I was living up to it. Marin looked up. And? Savio met her eyes. I'm still working on it. By the following afternoon, the working had gotten considerably more complicated. The Meridian Club's director of operations was a compact, immaculate man named Prescott Hardy, who managed the club's staff with the particular efficiency of someone who considered a loose thread a personal insult. He summoned Marin to his office before the evening shift. Audra Chilton, the club's head of member relations, was already seated when Marin arrived. Marin had seen that specific combination before. She sat down. Hardy folded his hands. Miss Boyle, yesterday evening you spent approximately 45 minutes alone in conference room 3 with Savio Marrow. Yes. During which time you told him that your deceased brother had a personal connection to him. I recognized a coin he was wearing. I told him so. Audra Chilton crossed her legs with the stillness of a person who has already made their decision and is waiting for the conversation to confirm it. You understand how that appears. I understand how you've decided it appears. Hardy's jaw tightened. The club cannot allow staff to manufacture personal relationships with members for the purpose of. I manufactured nothing. Then prove it. The words dropped between them, and Marin felt something specific and cold in her chest. Not grief. She had learned to carry grief. This was different. This was the instruction to produce her brother's memory on demand for people who had already decided what it was worth. My brother died in the line of duty 17 years ago, she said. I'm not going to perform that for your investigation. You will explain yourself, Hardy said, or you will be suspended pending review. Marin looked from Hardy to Audra Chilton. The decision was already made. She could see it in the quality of the silence, the slight forward lean of Hardy's posture, the way Audra had arranged her notepad like a prop in a scene that had already been rehearsed. She unclipped her badge from her lanyard and set it on the desk. Then a voice came from the doorway. Mr. Hardy. Savio had not knocked. He rarely needed to. The door was simply open, and then he was standing in it, and the quality of the room changed the way a room changes when a load-bearing wall shifts. Hardy stood immediately. Mr. Marrow, this is an internal. Suspension for what cause? Conduct unbecoming. Inappropriate engagement with. She told me she recognized something she recognized. Savio looked at Marin. Did he suspend you? He was about to. Savio reached into his jacket. Don't. He stopped. Marin stepped forward, into the space between him and Hardy's desk. If you make a phone call right now, I spend the rest of my career being the woman who used Savio Marrow to keep her job. It won't matter that I'm telling the truth. It'll matter that you showed up. They humiliated you. Yes, and I want them to have to take it back because the truth proves them wrong, not because they're afraid of you." She held his gaze. "There's a difference. You know there is." Savio looked at her for a long moment. Then he lowered his hand. Hardy appeared relieved. He should not have been. Marin picked up her badge. "Find the police incident report from November 14th, 17 years ago. Cartwright Street. It will have my brother's name and a record of the civilians present." She looked at Audra Chilton. "You want proof? That's where it starts." She walked out. In the service corridor, her composure lasted until she reached the fire door. Then she leaned against the cold metal and pressed the heels of her hands into her eyes, because what she could never tolerate, what had never gotten easier, was having to prove to strangers that Daniel Boyle had existed. She heard footsteps behind her. She didn't turn around. "The report won't have my name," Savio said. "I was a minor. The record was sealed." Marin lowered her hands. "Then we find another way." He was quiet for a moment. "We?" She turned. "You've had 17 years to look. You clearly need better help." Something shifted in his expression. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was in that direction. The incident report took 2 days to surface through proper channels. It confirmed Daniel Boyle, Precinct 14, responding officer on scene. It listed 4 adult civilians recovered safely from the premises. The 5th, a minor, was referenced only as juvenile male, age 17, released to guardians. That left a gap. The gap was filled by a retired officer named Earl Mabry, who had been Daniel Boyle's partner for 6 years before Boyle made detective and Mabry moved to training. He was 71, living in a walk-up in Queens, and he remembered the Cartwright Street incident the way he remembered all the ones where everything almost went wrong. He met Marin and Savio in a coffee shop 3 blocks from his building. He was already seated when they arrived, a large man running soft around the middle, with the particular patience of someone who has spent decades waiting for things to resolve. When Savio sat across from him, Earl Mabry looked at the coin around his neck for a long time. "Danny give you that?" "Yes, sir." Mabry nodded slowly. He carried 2 of those, one for himself, one for... He stopped, looked at Marin. "You're the sister." "Marin." Something crossed the old man's face. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "He talked about you, constantly. Drove me a little crazy, honestly. Marin got her CPA. Marin's up for a promotion. Marin. He said it with enough warmth that Marin had to look at the window for a moment. "He gave that boy the coin," he said to Savio. "I was outside when the kid came out with Danny's radio. I was there when he went back in. I watched him hand it over." "Would you be willing to say that officially?" Marin asked. "Decided I would the second you walked in." Earl Mabry looked at Savio again. "Danny would have wanted to know you turned out decent." Savio met the old man's eyes and said nothing, but his hand moved once to the coin at his chest, and then was still. Prescott Hardy received the documentation 3 days later. The incident report, Earl Mab's signed statement, and a photograph the old man found in his personal files. Danny in uniform outside the precinct, the chain clearly visible at his collar. The Meridian Club's board convened a brief review. Hardy was instructed to issue a formal retraction. He delivered it in writing. Marin read it once and set it aside. Afterward, when the board members had filed out and Hardy had retreated with the specific posture of a man who would spend the next 6 months regretting a decision, Audra Chilton paused near the door. She looked at Marin. "The statement from the retired officer. I didn't expect it to be real." Marin looked at her steadily. "I know." Audra left without another word. The foundation came later, as these things do, built in pieces, over months, from conversations that happened at 10 in the evening, when the paperwork was done, and neither person had a particular reason to leave. Savio called it, in the first draft, the Daniel Boyle Memorial Fund. Marin read the name and set the folder down. He would have hated that. The attention. The word memorial. He thought memorials were for people who'd stopped doing anything useful. She pushed the folder back. He'd want it to keep working. Savio was quiet a moment. What did he say about the job, specifically? He said he was just the first alarm, that the point was always the second one. She paused, because she hadn't thought of that phrase in years, and the accuracy of it still surprised her. When a fire's too big, you call for a second alarm. More people, more help. He said that's what the whole job was. Nobody carries it alone. Savio looked at the folder. Then he crossed out the title. The Second Alarm Foundation, Marin said. He wrote it down. That was the beginning. The foundation funded legal aid and educational support for the families of officers and first responders killed in active duty. Marin ran the intake process. Savio provided the resources, and the complete lack of interest in receiving credit for them, which Marin found both irritating and privately remarkable. She also began to notice other things. He read every application himself. He remembered details, not just names, but the specific small things that separated a case file from a person. When a woman applying for support mentioned that her son wanted to study civil engineering because his father had inspected bridges, Savio read that sentence twice and approved the application before Marin had finished her summary. She didn't comment. She moved the next file closer. Their relationship changed in those moments. Not dramatically, not with speeches or declarations. It changed the way light changes in late afternoon, gradually, and then all at once, and you look up and realize the room is different from how it was an hour ago. One evening, late, the foundation office nearly empty, she caught him looking at the photograph of Danny she'd framed and placed on the filing cabinet. His expression was the specific kind of complicated that meant he'd been thinking about something longer than he wanted to. "You're doing it again," she said. He looked up. "Doing what?" "Treating it like a debt." It was. It was a decision he made, his to make. She crossed her arms. "He didn't give you that coin so you'd spend 20 years paying it back. He gave it to you because he thought you were worth it." Savio looked at the photograph. "I don't know what my life would have been if he hadn't come through that door." "Nobody does. That's not the point." Marin sat down across from him. "Gratitude doesn't have to hurt forever to be real. You're allowed to just," she searched for the right word, "live forward." Savio said nothing for a long time. "He lost his life," he finally said. "Yes." Her voice gentled. "And I miss him every single day. But if you turn your surviving into a punishment, the robbery gets to take something from both of you." She looked at Danny's photograph, then back at Savio. "He went back in because he chose to. Honor that by choosing, too." Savio looked at her differently after that. Not as Daniel Boyle's sister. Not as the woman who had handed him language for something he'd been carrying without words. As Marin. As the specific, irreducible person who had stood across a conference table from him 6 months ago and made his bodyguard look inadequate. He noticed when she laughed. He noticed when something bothered her and she went quiet instead of saying so. He noticed that she took her coffee with exactly 1 sugar and pretended she didn't. He told her this last thing on a Tuesday evening because he had not planned to, and unplanned things had a way of coming out on Tuesdays. She stared at him. "You've been counting my sugar?" "I've been noticing," a pause. "There's a difference." She was quiet a moment. Then, "Savio, I need to ask you something." "Ask." Would we be sitting here if Danny hadn't died? The question settled into the room. "No," he said. She looked away. "Because I never would have met you." He waited until she looked back. "I know that's not what you mean. I need to know if you see me. Or if you see the last thing he left behind." He didn't answer immediately. She appreciated that more than she would have appreciated a quick denial. "When you walked into that conference room," he said, "I thought about your brother for about 30 seconds. Then you told me that the truth had to be enough on its own, or it wasn't worth anything." He held her gaze. "And I stopped thinking about your brother." Maren said nothing. "You are the most inconvenient person I have ever met," Savio continued, with the particular precision of someone reading a list they've had time to compile. "You correct my estimates. You return my calls in the order you feel like returning them. You told my head of legal that his severance language was imprecise, which it was, but he spent a week rearranging his entire office in resentment." He paused. "When something good happens, you're who I want to tell." Maren looked at the table. "That started with Danny," he said. "It has nothing to do with him anymore." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "This is deeply inconvenient for me also." His mouth moved. "Why?" "Because I was planning to stay invisible." She looked up. "I'm not very good at invisible when someone keeps looking." Savio reached across the table and covered her hand with his. He didn't pull her toward him. He didn't say anything else. He left his hand there and waited, because that, she had come to understand, was the specific way he showed respect. Maren turned her palm over. The Foundation's first annual ceremony was held in February. The room was filled with families, children, spouses, parents, whose lives had been altered by the particular loss that comes from loving someone who chose the work. Each of them held an envelope confirming educational funding, or a retraining program, or a family counseling grant. The envelopes were plain. Savio had fought off 2 separate proposals to make them more impressive. At the center of the room was a memorial wall. Danny's photograph was there among dozens of others, his precinct number beneath his name, his years of service. Maren had written the caption herself, 3 drafts until she got it down to 1 sentence. He always went back in. Near the end of the ceremony, Savio stepped forward to the wall alone. The room went quiet. He reached up and lifted the chain from his neck. Maren's breath caught. She had not expected this. She understood it immediately. Beside Danny's photograph, she had placed the second coin, the framed one from her mother's hallway, brought here for this, though she hadn't known exactly how it would be used. Savio held his coin in both hands for a moment. He looked at Danny's face. He looked at the words beneath it. Then he placed the coin on the shelf below the photograph, next to its pair. For the first time in 17 years, they rested together. Savio looked at the wall in silence, no speech, no ceremony beyond the gesture itself. Then he turned and found Maren across the room. She walked to him. "He gave me a direction," Savio said quietly. "You gave me a reason to take it." Maren looked at the 2 coins, side by side. 17 years apart and now here, in a room full of families who would carry their own reasons forward, into schools and careers and ordinary Tuesdays that their own people would never see. "He didn't save you so you'd spend your life explaining it," she said. "He saved you so there'd be a life." Savio took her hand. Behind them, someone began to applaud. Then someone else. Then the whole room was on its feet, and Maren leaned into his shoulder and let it wash over her. Not as relief, not as vindication, but as the particular warmth of a promise finally finding its full shape. 17 years ago, a police officer had pressed a coin into a frightened boy's hand and left him 4 words. For the ones after. He could not have known what the ones after would build. He could not have known the boy would become powerful, or that his sister would one day recognize a coin in a conference room, or that 2 people marked by the same loss would find in each other something new enough to carry forward. Danny Boyle had gone back into that store on a Tuesday night because it was the right thing to do. And because he had, this room existed. And because this room existed, dozens of families would walk into their futures a little less alone. That was what it meant. Not the coin finally returned to its place. Not even the name on the wall. It meant that one person's choice, unremarkable, unheroic, simply right, had moved through time like a second alarm moving through smoke, finding everyone still in the building and saying, "I'm here. You don't carry this alone."